Scaphism. Scaphism was an ancient Persian execution used mainly for traitors, designed to prolong death as a spectacle. The victim was fixed between two hollowed boats so only the head, arms, and legs remained exposed, making escape impossible. He was force-fed milk and honey until diarrhea weakened him, while his body was smeared with the same mixture to attract flies and vermin. Insects fed on the flesh, burrowed into open sores, and laid eggs that turned the body into a living nest as dehydration and infection spread. Death followed after days of infestation, organ failure, and sepsis, making it one of the longest and most excruciating punishments recorded in antiquity. Lingchi, death by 1,000 cuts. Lingchi was an imperial Chinese execution practiced from the 10th century until 1905. The condemned was tied to a wooden frame while the executioner sliced away skin, muscle, and fat in hundreds of shallow cuts, deliberately avoiding arteries to keep the victim alive. Pain was extreme and prolonged, as the body was mutilated piece by piece while the victim remained conscious for hours. It was imposed for crimes such as treason or killing a parent, serving as a public warning of state authority and control. The blood eagle was a Norse execution ritual recorded in medieval sources. The victim was laid face down and the executioner cut through the back to sever ribs from the spine and pull them outward to resemble wings. Pain was catastrophic as the ribs snapped, nerves were exposed, and the lungs were pulled through the openings while the victim remained alive. It was performed on enemies or oath-breakers as both punishment and spectacle, meant to display the power and ruthlessness of Viking justice. Flaying. Flaying was used in Assyria, Persia, and medieval Europe as a public execution. The condemned was stripped and the skin was methodically cut away from muscle and tissue using knives or blades, often starting at the face or limbs. Pain was overwhelming as exposed nerves fired continuously, blood seeped slowly from the skinless surface, and the victim remained alive for hours in shock. Authorities used flaying to terrorize populations and mark offenders as examples, sometimes nailing the removed skin to city walls as a warning. Sawing. Sawing was used in parts of Europe and Asia as a public execution for severe crimes. The victim was suspended upside down so blood rushed to the head, keeping him conscious longer, while a large saw was drawn slowly between the legs and upward through the body. Pain was extreme as the blade tore through bone, muscle, and vital organs, while circulation kept the brain aware of every cut. Death came only when the saw reached the chest or head, making it both prolonged and excruciating. This method was chosen to maximize terror, turning the human body itself into a spectacle of dismemberment. Catherine's wheel. The Catherine's wheel, used across medieval Europe, was a brutal form of execution by breaking. The condemned was tied to a large wooden wheel, and iron bars or hammers were used to smash the limbs at multiple points until bones splintered and joints collapsed. Pain was catastrophic as the body twisted unnaturally, nerves shattered, and victims were often left alive but immobilized. Death could take days through shock, blood loss, or exposure, while the broken body remained displayed on the wheel. Rat torture. Rat torture was recorded in ancient Rome and later in South America as a method of slow execution. The victim was restrained while a cage or pot containing live rats was strapped against the stomach or chest, and heat was applied to drive the animals inward. Pain was immediate and escalating as the rats clawed, bit, and burrowed through skin and muscle in search of escape. Death came from massive internal damage, blood loss, or sepsis, as organs were torn open from within. This punishment was designed for terror, turning the natural instincts of animals into a weapon of fear and prolonged agony. Bamboo torture. Bamboo torture was documented in Asia, where the plant's rapid growth was weaponized against captives. The victim was tied above sharpened bamboo shoots, which pierced the body as they hardened and grew upward. Pain was unrelenting as skin and muscle were slowly punctured, driving deeper each day until organs were destroyed. Death came through internal bleeding, infection, or total impalement as the stalks advanced. Historical accounts describe it being used on prisoners of war, making it both an execution method and a form of military punishment. Glass rod shattering. When a person committed a sexual offense in parts of Europe, the sentence was glass rod torture. A slender glass rod was forced into the urethra and then struck with a hammer, splintering it into countless fragments inside the body. Pain was immediate and unbearable as sharp edges shredded tissue, severed nerves, and ruptured blood vessels. Hemorrhage began instantly, and infection spread with every cut, rapidly leading to septic shock. Death followed quickly in most cases, as the body collapsed under blood loss and systemic infection, turning the punishment into both execution and retribution aimed directly at the sexual organ. The rack. When a person was accused of treason or conspiracy in medieval Europe, they were often placed on the rack. The victim was tied by the wrists and ankles to rollers at either end of a wooden frame which were slowly turned to stretch the body. Joints dislocated, ligaments tore, and muscles split apart as the frame was tightened. The agony was relentless, leaving victims crippled or tearing them apart completely if the torture continued. It was used both to extract confessions and to break political enemies beyond recovery. Yubitsume, finger cutting. When a member of the Yakuza broke a rule or disobeyed orders, the penalty was Yubitsume. The offender severed the last joint of the little finger with a short blade, the digit chosen because it anchors grip strength on a sword. The loss crippled weapon control, weakening strikes and making defense unstable. Pain was immediate and severe, with exposed bone and nerves at constant risk of infection or gangrene before modern medicine. This ritual forced dependence on superiors and left a permanent mark of disgrace, binding the offender to obedience through visible mutilation. These punishments showed how power controlled life through fear and pain. To see how that same power eventually collapsed, watch Every Empire's Brutal Collapse Explained.